You really shouldn't fall asleep in class.
Really, dude? It's school. What do you expect me to do? Stay awake? Hey guys, it's David here and welcome to another Davey P Reviews, and this week, requested by my best mate Craig, Nightmare on Elm Street remake. Now this one should be a very interesting one, but I'll get more to that in my own critical analysis and why I think it's interesting. So before we go any further, spoilers, don't want to ruin this for anybody who hasn't seen this film. Granted, most of our Nightmare on Elm Street fans probably would have seen this film, but anyway. So let's get started on the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. So we start out with our teenager Dean in the Springwood Diner, and he's not getting served by one of the waitresses who just walks right past him. And you're like, okay, that's very rude for a waitress. Isn't it her job to, oh, I don't know, give out customer service? So Dean follows her into the back room, and we notice strange things like pots burning like a furnace, and then pigs' heads on plates. Very, very appealing appetizer. And so Dean hears a noise, turns around, and whoosh, Freddy's glove. Oh man. So he goes to investigate the door swing, which is nothing, then wham! Freddy attacks him at that point and he wakes up. And then we meet our other protagonists of the film, Nancy, Quentin, Jesse and Chris. And it's at this moment that Chris is meeting up with Dean in the diner because she's awfully concerned about him because he does look like a complete train wreck, despite the fact not sleeping for several hours or days. And there's an accident where he knocks some coffee over and is like, oh no, I'm sorry. It's like, and she goes off to get herself cleaned up. Dean just lowers his head again. You're like, oh no. And then confronted by Freddy again. And he has a knife at this point. So, and then he's got him in a lock like this. And in the real world, it looks like Jesse is suicidal, shall we say. It's at this moment that Chris comes back into the picture and, Dean, what are you doing? It's like, you're not real! It's like, Dean, stop it, Dean! And that's the opening of the film. And then we cut to Dean's funeral, as you would, obviously. And then we start realizing that Chris is now having these similar nightmares that Dean was having. And you think it's passed on at this point. And a few scenes go on where it's like school, and she has a nightmare at school where Freddy taunts her at school as well, and she has this complete scream outburst in class and like, Chris, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. And it's just like her hair's in her book and you're like, and little do we know, like scenes go on where she's having these nightmares, and then she notices something at the funeral as well where she had this picture of her as a child and she met Dean as well, and she's saying, how is this possible? I met him in junior high school. Very interesting. As it goes on, she has more of these nightmares. She's really scared. And this is where ex-boyfriend Jesse comes in. He's concerned for her well-being as well this time. And it's like, what's happening? And they sit down in her bedroom and she's saying, I'm having these dreams about this horribly disfigured guy with... And then at this point Jesse interrupts her by saying, knives for fingers. So he's having the same dream as well. It's like, oh man! That night, Chris asks Jesse to stay with her and he says yes, like the decent person that you would be if you were confronting somebody like this who's obviously scared to death, doesn't want to be alone. And they're in bed, and you can probably guess where it's going then. It's like nightmare time again, and Chris's dog's barking, Rufus, come on boy, and then she goes out to investigate, scratches on his body, and he's dead. Oh my god! Comes back into the house because it's Freddy. And it's that point she's then transported to a school, and little kids like, come on, and then kids in another room, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Anyone who's seen A Nightmare on Elm Street would know what that tune is like. Very creepy, very fun to hear. And she wakes up from that dream, still in bed, and Jesse's in the bed as well. And she goes to the bathroom, just freshens up. She's like, need to stay awake. And she comes back into the room, and we see Jessie on the bed. And she goes into the bed, and there's Freddy. Found you. And it's like Jesse has this startling wake up and sees Chris shaking in the bed, violently screaming. It's like, Chris, wake up, Chris! And knocked out, and she hovers over the bed like a scene from The Bloody Exorcist. And she gets tossed around and then cut down the chest. Oof. So then Jesse is completely startled by this and scared as hell and runs to Nancy for help. Don't know what she's gonna do, guy. And Jesse is arrested because the police think it was him who committed this homicide. And then Quentin and Nancy believe it wasn't him, it was someone else. And it's that point that Jesse's having the nightmares in prison, and then he gets killed off at that point as well. I'm like, oh no. So now it's up to Quentin and Nancy to find out what is happening. And they're finding more images of their past, of like them as kids, and noticing that, hang on, I met this person in junior high school. How am I meeting him here? I was at high school. I only met them at high school, and I'm seeing them here as kids. Like, okay. So more nightmares go on. Quentin has one in a swimming pool when he's doing some laps. And that is when we're introduced to Freddy's origin of how he becomes horribly burned. And it's quite a good scene. It kind of explains more about Freddy's history, about how he had the sweater and like how he was horribly burned. And before that as well, like Nancy's mum finds them, her and Quentin, looking through the family photos and sees like this, what are you doing? And then it's that point we get the backstory of Freddy, who in this version is a gardener at this preschool where the kids were going to. In this version it's clearly explained he was a child molester. In the original film it was a child killer, whereas in this one definitely a molester. So anyway, back to Nancy and Quentin finding more and more history of what happened and how they don't have memory of this. And apparently the parents didn't want them to remember, so they took matters into their own hands, burned Freddy in this warehouse. So it's Quentin and Nancy now stopping Freddy on their own, but also trying to find out some history of why he's doing this. And so they just find the old preschool where they were. The genius thing about this film as well is like they addressed at one point in the film that Quentin thinks that Freddy was innocent. Like they were 5 years old, they could have made up these lies that the kids were telling the parents. And it's like, oh my god, we just killed an innocent man. That is a good twist, I think, on the film. And so they go to the preschool and find the cave, as the kids were saying to their parents, like Freddy took them to this cave, what turns out to be his bedroom in the preschool. How a gardener has a bedroom at a preschool is anybody's guess. And we find out, oh my god, he wasn't innocent at all, he was guilty as hell. So then it's up to Quentin and Nancy to bring Freddy to justice, who Nancy found out in a pharmacy by ripping off a piece of his sweater that he could be pulled out from the dream. So then they decide to do that. And the climax of the film, they obviously do that. Freddy's killed, end of story. And we think happily ever after. Then cut to black, and then we're back at Nancy's house and we're like, oh no, what's happening now? So it's just her with her sling on and her saying, Mom, I know you were trying to protect me, I'm sorry. And then she puts keys down and she's behind a mirror at this point, and she just puts the keys down on the table, and as she pulls herself up, Freddy's behind her and dragged through the mirror, and Nancy's screaming in the background. And then it cuts to black, and okay, finally the end. Like there's no stopping this. And how does this film end? The Everly Brothers playing All I Have to Dream. All I Have to Do Is Dream. A very good theme there. As I think of it as like a secondary theme to the film, because the subject matter is just all about dreams and dreaming. And that's it. End of the movie. It's just his terror will still go on. So, my own critical analysis of the film. Obviously, anybody who has seen this film, and all the Nightmare on Elm Street fans, will obviously compare this film to the original. But that lies in the problem. The film was really good on its own. It's like there was no need for a remake where it's like a lot of the people are going to say that. It's like, remakes shouldn't be made unless they're done right, whereas like a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street fans will think of this film as like, it was done poorly, but it's like, little do you forget, this is a new interpretation. Like, you have to approach this film like you've never seen the last film. Who am I kidding? We've all seen that one. If you approach that mindset, like, approach this like a new interpretation of Freddy, it is actually a pretty decent one, I think, personally. Granted, it does like have the homages to the old films. Like, for example, there's a scene where Nancy runs down the corridor and then the carpet turns to blood and she's like drowning, and then Freddy's saying, "How's this for a wet dream?" And it's like obviously a reference to the fourth film. And some of the lines as well, like Nancy in bed's like struggling and Freddy saying like, "Your boyfriend can't save you, I'm your boyfriend now," and it's like obviously a homage to the very first film. Yeah, so it's just like the subtle little homages to the old films, which I thought was a good touch to keep the fans slightly entertained. But another thing I quite like this film in particular is like they introduced new things. Like in the original film, they try to stay awake as best they can, whereas in this film they introduce things like micronaps, which is your brain essentially shutting down and restarting again. So it's essentially you're dreaming but you don't know it. And you can also be dreaming whilst you're awake, which is quite a terrifying thought for a film like this. And also the fact that after that, your brain would automatically shut down and it would induce a coma, which in this film means permanent sleep. Yeah, it's quite good little touches like that, whereas like, it's good to introduce new things, but it's just like, obviously keep it similar to the old style, to keep the old fans entertained. Now, the new Freddy Krueger, played by Jackie Earle Haley, who I think did a pretty good job in this film, because like I said before, everyone's going to compare him to Robert Englund, and don't get me wrong, Robert Englund is the best Freddy in my opinion. I think Robert Englund's always been portrayed as like a jokey, wisecracking Freddy with a dark, twisted humour before he kills his victims, whereas Haley in this interpretation, he's trying to play more of a serious, dark, twisted character who wants revenge on the kids who apparently did him wrong by telling the truth. He does do wisecracks now and then, but it's just like all about him is just like fear and intimidation, which I think should be Freddy as a whole. I do like the wisecracks now and then, but it's like focus on fear and intimidation to scare the hell out of these kids, which I think is probably the best Freddy in my opinion. But don't get me wrong, like, Robert Englund is the best Freddy in my opinion, but it's just like, I would like Freddy if he was more intimidating and not like wisecracking as much as Robert Englund. But it's like, yeah, it was a very good interpretation, so it was a good job for Jackie Earle Haley, because I think I heard like the makers saw his appearance in Watchmen where he played the vigilante Rorschach, and they said like, that's our Freddy, we've got to get him as Freddy, and it's just like, I think so too. I think he did like a very good job on this new interpretation of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was very good in my opinion. So then we're introduced to the new characters, which is Nancy, Quentin, Jesse and Chris, who are obviously counterparts to their original characters. So it's like Chris is Tina, Jesse is Rod, Quentin is Glenn, and Nancy is Nancy. Not much change to that last one there, but it's just like difference in surname, things like that. Unfortunately to them, like my mate Craig addressed it, it's like their dialogue's not that very interesting. It's just like, I kind of agree, it's like they're just like trying to focus on their backstories, like they're trying to find their repressed memories, and it's just like, I would have, in my opinion, I would have liked more development on them as individual characters, but again it was just like more focus on the trying to find the repressed memories of this preschool that they had. So it's just, like I said, I would have liked more time to get to know these characters individually, but it's like we see Nancy as like this sort of disturbed young teen. It's like, why is she disturbed? Like, we don't know why she's disturbed. It's obviously because of the dreams she's having, but it's like we're introduced to her as this troubled teenager. It's like, we'd like to know why she's troubled in the first place, but the filmmakers are just more concerned about the repressed memory storyline going on here. So yeah, it's quite a good remake as remakes go, because it could have been a lot worse in my opinion, but I think it was quite a good retouch to it as well. It's like it introduced A Nightmare on Elm Street to be more intimidating, more scary than the wisecracking Freddy Kruegers we're all known and loved for it, but I do quite like this remake. It is quite a good remake as it is, so it's worthwhile to watch. How would I rate this? I'd rate this 3 out of 5. Definitely, it's okay. It's like, it's neither good, neither bad, it's just okay. It's worth checking out if you do like your Freddy Krueger. So yeah, that's the review, guys. And just something as well, because it's a Nightmare on Elm Street, I just thought I'd get across. I did meet Freddy Krueger twice in my lifetime. If I take you back a few years, it was 2013. Me and my friend Harrison were at this Comic-Con style in Glasgow called Collectomania, and who was one of the guest stars there? Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund. And we got him to sign my A Nightmare on Elm Street box. Yep, here it is, the original box set itself, and it says, "Welcome to Primetime, bitch," which I think was one of my favourite Freddy Krueger lines from the third film. To David, Robert Englund. That is probably one of my prized possessions going on there. I've also got a framed photograph that I met of Freddy 2 years later in 2015 at the same event. To David, welcome to my nightmare, Freddy, Robert Englund. At that event as well, I also took a Vine video because I was into the Vine craze at that point. So I thought I'd love to show you guys the Vine video I did of me meeting Freddy Krueger. So here it is. Oh my god, I love that Vine. That is probably by far one of my favourite Vines I've ever done. It's just, I loved it in the fact that he thought it was a photograph at first, but little did he know he saw it was moving, and then I think at that precise moment in his mind he was like, okay, I'll do something. How about my Freddy laugh? And that laugh kicked in. It's like, oh, yes! Yes! It was so great. It was so good to have on Vine. It's like, I'll always remember that. It was so fantastic and so well done. So that's the review, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. So give it a like if you liked it or not. And if you also want to see more reviews in the future, click the subscribe button down below and I will love you guys for that. So again, hope you enjoyed the review, guys, and I hope you have a great day. So I will see you next week for another gaming review. So see you later.